Welcome back for another episode of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm Ryan Thomas. Thank you for tuning in to another post-fight reaction episode of the show. This is one of my favorite segments that I do on my podcast, that I record on my podcast, I should say, reacting to last night's action, UFC 265. The UFC Interim Heavyweight title was on the line between Derrick the Black Beast Lewis and Ciryl Gane. A fun fight going into the action and a fun fight coming out of the action. A lot to dive into, though, in this post-fight reaction episode for myself. I have a few very interesting takes on this fight and why it went down the way that it did. I looked at this fight with my eyes wide open, right? Like a lot of fight fans looked at this fight between Derrick Lewis and Ciryl Gane and said, why is this fight happening? The timing of this fight is very weird. It's very odd. It just doesn't make sense as to why the UFC would put a heavyweight interim title belt on the line when, in fact, Francis Ngannou just won the title 3 months ago. It doesn't really make much sense, right? Business is business. If it makes dollars, it makes sense. The UFC was in Houston, the hometown of Derrick Lewis, which I'll get to more in depth, throughout the show. More in-depth analysis on that point will be made for sure, for certain. Obviously, they want Derrick Lewis in his own backyard, fighting in his own backyard. That's a cool storyline. And Ciryl Gane has been very impressive in the limited action that he's fought in the UFC octagon. He's now 10-0 as the new interim UFC Heavyweight Champion. And first and foremost, now that, Gane won this fight, how does a fight with Gane and Francis Ngannou look? And what's very interesting is that the UFC has what Dana White referred to as the perfect storm. The UFC does have the perfect storm. Dana White is right about that in terms of Gane being a former training partner of Francis, and in terms of the UFC finally being able to negotiate a deal to put fights on in France. You have a lot of people in France that are massive fans of Ciryl Gane. The UFC does have, two powerhouse heavyweight superstars in Ngannou and Ciryl Gane, especially after this victory last night. And I'm curious to see how the majority of MMA analysts will look at Gane and Ngannou and how that fight will shake down. But I'm here to tell you that just personally, I think that it's great for the UFC heavyweight division to have a challenger like Gane coming off of the fight last night. And in talking, briefly about that, I'll go back to that in a little bit. But the UFC's got something special with Ngannou, of course, as the true champ, and they obviously have something special in Ciryl Gane. Last night, the first round or so, I'm thinking, okay, Gane's just really bouncing around. He's not really doing a whole lot. He's somewhat, just bouncing around, kicking, sticking, and moving. And he's avoiding the big shot of Derrick Lewis that never was thrown. And as frustrating, or I should say, as impressive a performance as that was for Ciryl Gane to win the form and fashion that he did, Derrick Lewis didn't throw a punch for 2 rounds. I mean, how do you win a fight? How do you win a true fight against a true up-and-comer, a phenom, without throwing a punch or a kick? Within, 3 rounds, 3 punches, kicks were landed from Derrick Lewis. I don't know what happened last night to Derrick Lewis. What happened to Derrick Lewis? I have a few theories, and my theories kind of flow within the process of, okay, one, for starters, what happened to Derrick Lewis? Is it the fact that Derrick Lewis fought on his home soil? Was the pressure of the event a little bit too much for him? Was the opponent too elusive for Derrick Lewis? It sure looked it. I mean, in terms of a speed advantage, Ciryl Gane moves like a middleweight. He's very awkward. He's very light on his feet. Not many heavyweights can move that way, and not many opposing heavyweights that fight Ciryl Gane can really game plan for that. Who could you bring in from a sparring standpoint, training standpoint, that moves in that fashion? At heavyweight, with the size of Ciryl Gane, and the speed of Ciryl Gane, there's really virtually nobody outside of Francis. And obviously Derrick is not going to be able to bring in Francis into his camp. So I wondered how Derrick Lewis would combat that. I wondered how Derrick Lewis would prepare for that. And it looked as if there was just no way for Derrick Lewis to really seal the deal on any of his punches, to throw anything. I mean, it was very frustrating from a fan standpoint watching that fight last night, watching it knowing that, yeah, Ciryl Gane fought a great fight, right? He implemented his game plan. He avoided the big shot, avoided Derrick Lewis getting in close to him. All power to him for that. And that was extremely impressive. But you're coming away knowing that there were moments in the fight last night between Lewis and Gane where Derrick Lewis could have closed the distance, should have closed the distance, and he let Ciryl Gane do what he wanted to do. Stay away from him, move in and out, have these somewhat, elusive reactions to everything that Derrick Lewis was movement-wise trying to do. It was almost as if Derrick Lewis was trying to set something up that just simply was not there. There was just no setup to anything. He just couldn't really find his footing. And it's a tough performance. As I sit here, on the post-fight reaction show, Thomas Take Sports Podcast, how do I even break this down? When one fighter in Derrick Lewis didn't even throw a punch for 2 rounds. I'm sitting there thinking, when is this going to turn into a heavyweight slobber knocker that I thought it was going to? It never did. So from a fan standpoint, the fight to me was extremely disappointing. And I think Derrick Lewis is to blame for that. I hate to say that in that way because I know these guys train super hard. They meticulously prepare for their opponent. But Derrick Lewis, I mean, buddy, his hometown, fighting in front of his hometown, you would have thought that he would have had a much better performance. But what truly happened was that I believe Ciryl Gane offered an elusiveness and a agility type style that no heavyweight has seen, let alone Derrick Lewis. And Derrick Lewis has fought some of the best of the best. He's a true vet inside the sport. And Derrick Lewis just looked completely perplexed on how to finally land a big punch, how to get in close, how to, really drive home some punches. And Ciryl Gane did a fantastic job. All credit to him. He deserves a ton of credit for this performance. I know, a ton of people are going to look at this fight and they're going to say, why did this fight happen? I think you come away from this fight saying to yourself, this fight happened due in large part to the fact that Ciryl Gane definitely deserved this opportunity. You put, 2 guys in a cage together. One guy's 9-0. The other guy's got X amount of fights. He's beaten this person, that person. He's beaten pretty much everybody, including Francis Ngannou, even though it was an underwhelming fight. You now come away watching Ciryl Gane neutralize Derrick Lewis, shut down Derrick Lewis's offensive game, his firepower, and say Ciryl Gane definitely deserved that opportunity last night. I mean, it proved Dana White right in the sense that, a lot of people were wondering why Gane deserved the opportunity, and yet he showed why he earned it. I mean, he showed that he has a real skill set, and that skill set is something that few heavyweights have, if any, in terms of the speed, in terms of the fluidity, in terms of the agility, the elusiveness, all of those things. Ciryl Gane is a tough nut to crack, and I think that anyone is going to have a tough time with him, including Francis. Whether Francis loses or wins, that I don't even want to go into that. But Ciryl Gane is definitely a force to be reckoned with in this sport, and Ciryl Gane is somebody that I think more than deserved the opportunity. Now, in terms of entertainment value, that fight was just not entertaining to me. That fight just did not do it for me. But in terms of what the entertainment value could provide us in the next bout between Gane and Ngannou, as we go back and circle back around, Gane, the new interim champion, UFC Heavyweight interim champion. How does a fight with Gane and Ngannou look? Obviously, these guys were training partners together. And I know for a fact that Ngannou has the power advantage, but not by much. I know for a fact that Gane has the speed advantage, but not by much. This is probably one of the more intriguing UFC heavyweight title fights in recent memory, going back to when Cain Velasquez and Junior Dos Santos finally met in the cage, going back to when Brock Lesnar and Shane Carwin, two big locomotives going full speed ahead at each other. That was a super big fight back in the day. And you go back to the Stipe DC trilogy as well, which was obviously much, much later than the Lesnar Carwin fight, I should say. But DC and Stipe as a trilogy was an ultra competitive trilogy. But this fight is one where you have two guys in their fighting prime, two guys that can move, two guys that can punch, two guys that have very well-rounded skill sets. One of those fighters is going to cancel the other out. And whether this fight happens in October, November, I would lean towards December as to when Ciryl Gane and Francis Ngannou will look to have their unification bout. And Dana White got this right. Dana White got this right in the sense that everyone was nitpicking this fight, saying that it wasn't the right fight to make between Lewis and Gane. And now it just makes that Ngannou title defense that much bigger. And really, the Derrick Lewis Ciryl Gane fight was not a middle finger to Francis as much as it was a middle finger to Stipe Miocic, the former UFC heavyweight champ, and a middle finger to longtime UFC-led heavyweight champ John Jones, who was moving up to heavyweight. Jones and Stipe, there's something to that. There's something to what does Gane versus Ngannou, or Ngannou versus Gane, I should say, what does that mean for Jones and Stipe? What does it mean for Jones and Stipe? And I think that there are a few thoughts within that. Ngannou and Gane are going to fight. They're going to fight. They're going to fight November, December, at the latest, okay? At the latest, January. So rumblings are that Stipe is accepting a fight with accepting of a fight with John Jones, but we haven't heard a peep out of John Jones. I don't know if John Jones is ever going to fight again. I really don't know if John is ever going to fight again. I can't say with 100% certainty that I expect to see John Jones ever step in there. But for Stipe, it's like, hey, I did get knocked out by Francis. We're one apiece, though. DC got his rematch. Where's my rematch, damn it? I get that point, but that is not going to happen now. That Ciryl Gane put on the performance that he did against Derrick Lewis. It was extremely impressive. I didn't see Derrick Lewis winning a single minute round of that fight due to the fact that he didn't throw any punches. How do you win a fight without throwing punches? It's impossible. It's impossible. I've never heard of a fighter winning a fight without throwing a punch or a kick. We'll say that too. I mean, kicks were thrown by Lewis, but they were blocked largely by Gane. I think Derrick Lewis is going to go back and look at this performance and say, what the hell was I doing in there? What went wrong? Why did I fight that way? I think he got a little bit of cage fright, stage fright, cage fright, whatever you want to call it, fighting in his hometown of Houston, as well as Gane implementing a perfect game plan. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was my UFC 265 main event post-fight reaction. Derrick Lewis comes up short against Ciryl Gane. Ciryl Gane, the new UFC interim heavyweight champion. I'm expecting a unification heavyweight bout between Francis Ngannou, current UFC heavyweight champ, and now Ciryl Gane, the new interim UFC heavyweight champion. So cannot wait for that fight. And onward and upward. We're moving on to September. And we got October. November's card is filling in. We got Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman part 2. And a fight that I expect to be the fight of the year contender in Michael Chandler versus Justin Gaethje. When that fight was finally announced, I was elated. I cannot wait for that one. So fight fans, a ton to discuss in the near future here. Stay tuned for all things combat sports, whether it's mixed martial arts or boxing, right here on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm Ryan Thomas. Keep enjoying the fights, everybody. We got some good ones coming up.